Joe from A Family Frenzy. I just finished my run for my 4,000 miles for equity challenge. Over the coming weeks, months, and years, I'll be running over 4,000 miles in order to raise awareness for systemic inequity experienced by marginalized people groups. Today, I'd like to continue discussing the convergence of politics, race, and mental health, as I think all of these cross over. And in particular, I want to discuss how we bias the political perspectives of youth that we are in circles with. So whether you're a parent, whether you're an aunt or an uncle, or whether you have any kind of mentor role with youth, and I'm going to use a very broad definition of youth. I'm going to say like all the way up even to like college age. I think it's important for us to consider how we carry ourselves when we are in discussions with youth concerning politics, and let's get into why. So hey, for those of you who don't know, me and my wife Stream, we do fitness, VR, cooking, and more. In addition to that, we like to foster open dialogues across the barriers of culture, race, ethnicity, faith, and gender. We do all of this on Twitch, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, and more, so feel free to connect with us in these spaces, and we can continue the dialogue from this video. So let's get into it. So I think it's really important for us to recognize what happens to us psychologically during the political process. And when I say like the political process, let's just look at elections in general for Congress, Senate, and the president. Now, it's really interesting because when we cast our vote in this democratic process, there's some level of psychological attachment that occurs to that vote. We feel that there's a power that comes with democracy. And because of that, we are kind of conditioned to make these snap judgments of either our candidate and why they're so great, as well as snap judgments of why the opposition is so awful. What's interesting is we have this sense of power with what we cast, yet we have limited ability beyond that vote being put in a box to do anything in that process. Like ultimately 140-ish million people are going to vote in the election. How much does our vote truly matter? Now, depending on which like congressional district you're in or which state you're in, it does matter more for president. The tension, right, between having all this power and having no power breeds cynicism. What I mean by cynicism, we often have this tainted perspective of politics that everyone in politics is either all bad and awful or all great and perfect. And it causes us to fight in the streets. It causes, and by streets, I mean like on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and all that, right? Like the cynicism breeds dissent, and it causes us to really look at politics with this tainted image that it's just garbage, it's awful. The problem is we imprint that on youth. So when we're at the dinner table, we need to consider how we discuss our vote or the way the world is. Because a lot of what news focuses on is the political process at the very top, at the upper end of representatives, senators, and the president. And ultimately on the ground, in a country that has over like 140 million people, we don't have a lot of power in those spaces. Actually, the US has about 300 million people, I think. We don't have any power, right? So because of that, it's going to be easy for us to form a snap judgment over an individual based on what media outlet we're watching or what social media we're consuming. And then we're going to project that onto our children and onto the youth in our lives, and it causes them to grow up with that same cynicism, that same bitterness with the process. And the reason I bring this up, when we talk about marginalized people groups and how they are disproportionately affected by governmental institutions, we're going to need this next generation to be actively engaged in politics and engaged in the government, because the government is what's going to allow, in some ways, things to shift so that there is equity. How do we do things differently? Well, I think the first thing is just recognizing that we don't regulate our mental health well concerning politics. We allow what occurs in the media, what occurs on social media, to actually impact our mental health. And then our families receive the brunt of it when we're at the dinner table, when we're walking down the street and looking at our phone and being like, oh my gosh, can you see what blah, 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 right? Like those moments teach our children that government and politics is evil, right? Or that we're supposed to have this slighted view or perspective. And as our children ask questions, are we giving them, answers that inform them on how to be engaged? Or are we giving them answers that are going to bias them towards one side of political beliefs? I think that's the area where we need to be concerned, is how are we imprinting our belief system on our children? And are we okay with that? Or is that just happening because we can't regulate our mental health? Rather, I would encourage you to potentially step away from the larger government, step away from the president, from the representatives, from the senators, because the reality is, like, you can mail them letters, you can call them, you can have some level of influence. But I think where you want to start with your youth is, what are your local government institutions? Are there opportunities to teach your children about the judges, your county judges, and why they were elected and what they believe and what they're doing, and whether or not you agree or don't agree with how they're doing things, or to connect with your local mayor or your local institutions, or even look at state government. But I would start at the county level where you're at, because that's going to be an opportunity to teach your children. You're much more likely to, like, be able to attend a city hall meeting with your child than you would be able to attend a state senate meeting, right? Or a federal senate meeting. So I'd say find opportunities for your youth to become involved with government. Find role models for them in politics. And it's not just people that are in your party, but find politicians that have done a lot to change the world, and help your children or the youth in your life see that. Because some of them need to aspire to government. Some of them need to be in positions of power to create equity for those who lack that power. And if we bias them towards having the cynicism, they'll never get engaged with the process. And that's going to cause these systemic inequities to perpetuate. It's going to cause the bitterness to perpetuate for decades to come, where really we need people that are passionate and engaged. And I'm not talking about, like, help them aspire to the political idols of the past, like Abraham Lincoln and George Washington. Those are all great, but those are very far reaching. Find someone today that they can follow. And, for me, like, when I was a youth, I really liked George W. Bush. I thought he was great. As an adult, I have different perspectives of him, but, like, from the Republican Party, that was an individual that I thought was really cool. And that helped me think, like, oh, maybe I could be a president someday. Or, today, like, I really like Bernie Sanders. A lot of people hate Bernie. That's okay, right? But help, like, your children see, like, hey, here's some people that are doing something. Like, what I love about Bernie is I could look up a video of him as a small city mayor, as the first socialist city mayor, like 40 years ago. And he's still the same person today, just the numbers have changed, but his platform's the same. That's something where I would want my child to see, like, look at this person who had integrity for 40 years within politics as an outsider. Even if I don't agree with everything his platform says, I can show my children the integrity that has been lived out as a politician. Those are the things we may want to imprint on our kids, because some of them can be world changers through institutions of power in order to drive equity. That's my encouragement to you. Again, if you're not a parent, it's okay. Don't worry about it, right? But, like, if you're in circles with youth, or if you're going out to dinner with friends and they have kids present, consider how you speak of the president. Consider how you speak of elected officials. Consider how you speak of those Democrats or those Republicans, because your children are watching and the youth in your life are watching. We need to consider what we're imprinting on them. So with that, I'm Joe. I'll see you around. If you have questions, if this upsets you, feel free to, like, post it in the comments below, right? Maybe I'm too much of an idealist. That's fine. I'm looking forward to your perspectives. And feel free to drop by our channel on Twitch, because that allows us to have a more live dialogue. And with that, I'll see you around, friends.